Next up, I'm very pleased to introduce Bill McKibben, founder at 350.org. We're going to talk about to change everything, we need everyone. And appearing in conversation with him, Matt Petronzio, social good editor at Mashable.
You're back so soon.
Yeah, a long time no see. Now I don't have to talk about how great I am. Talk about how great you are.
We don't have to. We can talk about how screwed the world is for a moment. Yeah,
that's the topic.
There's going to be plenty for everybody to fix. That all the people we've just heard fixing the planet have their work cut out for them.
Well, I mean, I think that the topic of this panel, this one-on-one, is really just kind of to talk about your work as, founder of 350.org. I mean, we have so much to talk about just within, the past week.
Yes, it's an important moment actually for thinking about the climate. I wrote the first book about all this 25 years ago. So I've had a long time to think about it, and this fall is seeing the kind of acceleration. It really began a year ago this week when 400,000 people were marching through the streets of New York in the biggest demonstration about anything in a very long time. I bet there were people here who were helping that day. It was a great day and it was a great evening. That evening the Rockefellers uptown announced that they were divesting their philanthropies from their fossil fuel stocks. You could have called that day the kind of beginning of the end of the fossil fuel age. And the question is only how fast that end will come. And the year since has seen both progress and regress. On the one hand, 2015 is the hottest year that the world has ever seen. It's going to smash the record that we set in 2014. July was the hottest month ever recorded on this planet. We see what's happening in places like California. The US is about to set a new record for the most wildfire acreage burned. Tons of bad news, but lots of good news too. This movement has continued to grow in amazing ways. Last week, my colleagues had a press conference here in New York to announce that the assets now divested from the fossil fuel movement are now pension funds, universities, churches now equal $2.6 trillion. People are saying we are no longer willing to be in bed with the most irresponsible companies that the world has ever seen. You watched people put their bodies on the line in Seattle and Portland this summer to try and stop Shell from drilling in the Arctic, to try and stop Shell having watched climate change melt the Arctic, go up then and exploit that to drill for yet some more oil. The challenge to that kind of irresponsibility is now everywhere, and I think we'll see at least some progress come December in Paris at the big, it'll be better than it was in Copenhagen 6 years ago, which wouldn't be hard. It will be, at the very least, a start in the right direction. Then the rest of us will really have to pick up our game to make sure that we push on in the very few years we have available to really, really close this gap.
So I want to talk about Paris a little bit, because I feel like right now, when it comes to climate change activism, all paths are leading to Paris, and for good reason. So I'm curious, how do you define success?
So Paris, any of these international negotiations are merely snapshots of where we are at the moment, i.e., how much pressure we've been able to apply to governments. It's sort of a record of that. In Copenhagen, we got no agreement because none of the world leaders feared going home without one. It was easier to bow to the demands of the oil industry, and there was no real censure for going home with a complete failure. That's not true anymore. Barack Obama couldn't come back to the United States, nor most other world leaders to their countries, and just say, we screwed up again. People would be outraged. But what's going to happen in Paris is a series not of agreements, but of pledges by individual countries that, if those countries actually followed them through, might limit global warming to 3 or 3.5 degrees Celsius, far, far more than the planet can actually take. So what that means, what we're talking about, is less a kind of road to Paris than a road through Paris. And by the way, we do have to someday figure out a set of metaphors that don't derive from the internal combustion engine to kind of make our point. But, you know, by next April, we're going to have huge days of action out on all these huge deposits of carbon, the tar sands in Canada, Venezuela, the huge coal fields in the Powder River Basin in Australia, all the places that we actually physically have to keep in the ground if we have any chance of keeping things from warming completely out of control. So civil society's role, what we'll see in Paris is how much governments are able to do at the moment, and that'll give us a good sense of how much more we have to do, and it'll be a lot more that we have to do.
Right. And I want to go back to divestment a little bit. Are you surprised by how quickly that movement has taken off?
I am, because 3 years ago, I wrote the article that sort of kicked it off. It was in Rolling Stone, and it wasn't even the cover. Justin Bieber was on the cover, you know. But it did become the most shared article in their history, and by the end of 2012, we had our very first institution to divest, a small college in Maine, Unity College, with an endowment of $13 million, and we were over the moon that this was beginning. I kind of figured it would take the same trajectory as the anti-apartheid divestment movement. That took 8 or 10 years to really sink in. But happily, because this is such a timed test, this is happening even faster. And as I say, you know, in the last year, we've seen the Church of England, the Episcopalians, Oxford, Edinburgh, Stanford, the University of California. Last week, we had the California retirement funds, CalPERS and CalSTRS, 2 of the 20 biggest pension funds on earth, begin divesting. And there's a story today saying that coal and oil companies are having a harder time now raising money because lots and lots and lots of funds have said we're no longer willing to engage in this, either for moral reasons or because, and sometimes both, they've figured out that these are lousy investments. One of the things that I'm the furthest thing in the world from a stock advisor, okay? But anybody who 3 years ago divested from fossil fuel has made out like a bandit since. One of the reasons that the California pension funds began divesting last week is because there was a study a couple of months ago showing they'd lost $5 billion in their investments in fossil fuel over the last 3 years. So the thing that's happening, and there's 2 things going on. One is this remarkable movement that's going to make it very difficult for these guys to expand, to keep doing what they're doing. And every week that we can hold them in check, every month that we can keep them from building new mines and new pipelines and whatever, that's a month where the price of a solar panel drops another 2 or 3%. The plummeting cost of renewable technology is the kind of pincers movement here that's causing the other huge long-term problem for the fossil fuel industry. Now, they're fighting back. I mean, look, the Koch brothers have announced that they're going to spend $900 million on the next U.S. election. That's more than the Republicans or the Democrats spent last time around. Koch brothers, party of 2, okay? They're the biggest leaseholders in the tar sands in Canada. They desperately want the Keystone Pipeline to get built, for instance. So that's why they're willing. It's a good investment for them if they can pull it off, okay? So the battle's by no means easy, but the tide of that battle has begun to turn in sharp ways. And as I say, the question is now whether we can press the advantage quickly enough to move us off fossil fuel fast enough to catch up with the physics. That's a difficult question, and I don't have the answer for it. I mean, the fact that the Arctic is already essentially melted is a very bad sign. It's not good when the biggest physical features on your planet begin to disappear like that. But finally, at least, there's some true engagement now around the world.
Right. And so I'm curious, going off of that, what would you say is the biggest impediment to the climate change movement? Is it climate deniers? Is it Congress? Is it?
It's all that money. I mean, look, this is the richest industry that the world has ever seen. And we learned, for instance, last week, there was a big leak of documents from inside Exxon. And what they showed was that Exxon knew as early as 1977 and conclusively by 1981 that global warming was very, very real. There was a chart that leaked out that showed exactly the temperature curve we've seen since. And this was very early in the game because they had some of the best scientists in the world working on their payroll. They took that information and instead of becoming an energy company and pioneering solar power, they took that information, they got scared about what it represented, and they started tossing money at climate denier groups and everybody else. They did exactly what the tobacco industry did, just literally. And the only difference here is that, the smoke that Exxon puts out wrecks the planet no matter whether you breathe it or not. I mean, that's what's driving this change. So they've been a huge impediment. And that's why the single most important thing that the climate movement, I think, has done has been concentrate a little bit less on making sure that everybody feels guilty about not having the right light bulb all the time, and concentrate more on bringing people together as a movement. This is a structural, systemic problem. If we had, for instance, a price on carbon, we would long since have moved much more decisively in the direction of renewable energy, but we can't get it because of the power of this industry, so we're weakening that power day by day, and we need everyone engaged in that fight. And when I say everyone, I don't just mean the United States. I mean, 350.org has organized about 20,000 demonstrations in every country on Earth except North Korea. Most of the people leading this fight are poor, black, brown, Asian, and young, because that's what most of the people in the world are. And those are the people who are getting hit hardest and first by a problem they did very, very little to cause. So this has turned into the first real global movement, and thank God, because it's the first real global problem quite like that.
And speaking about that this is really in the hands of everyone in the world, I wanted to end on a question about the China and the U.S. just made their second joint statement within the past 10 months on climate change, and really revealed a pretty ambitious goal for China by 2017 as far as carbon trading system goes. Do you think that is kind of points toward success and cooperation in Paris?
Absolutely. It's pointing us in the right direction. And the Chinese are being very responsible. I mean, they have no moral reason to be doing what they're doing. They have every right to go on for, a half a century pumping carbon into the atmosphere, because that's what we did to get rich. But they're smart enough to realize that, the Pearl River Delta is a few feet above sea level, that the Yangtze and the Yellow flow out of the glaciers of the Himalayas, which are melting fast. They're smart enough to realize that they've got to go to work. The real hope is that countries like India will see that and take that lead and follow it, and that we'll have nations like India really leapfrog immediately to renewable energy, that they'll do for energy what they did for telecommunications, skip over a whole generation. And we're starting to see that happen. Look, Bangladesh is going to be entirely solarized by 2021. The Grameen Bank and that micro-lending program proved to be the perfect skeleton on which to build now if we can do it there, we can do it any place in the world, if there's the kind of political will to make it happen. It's not technology that we lack, and it hasn't been for years now. The Germans proved that. This afternoon, after the equinox even, the Germans this afternoon generated 40% of the power they were using from solar power within their borders at the latitude of Germany. Technology is not the problem, it's political will. That we can muster if we keep getting people in the streets and in the jails and in all the places where we need them to move a very inert and very greedy system in the right direction.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you.